Before we get started, a quick message about LinkedIn Learning. At MarketStar, we pride ourselves in being masters of our craft. That's why MarketStar is providing all employees with free, unlimited access to LinkedIn Learning. With over 16,000 available courses ranging from business to creative to technology, there's a huge amount of knowledge just waiting to be discovered. Courses in LinkedIn Learning can even provide credits for professional certifications or continuing education. Courses are delivered through high-quality instructional videos, many produced in LinkedIn's own professional studio. Many courses also provide self-paced materials and course files, including daily work aids and one-sheeters to use on the job. And the topics are incredibly vast. Whatever it is you are looking to grow in, there's a great chance you'll find it in the LinkedIn Learning Library. Get started today by creating or linking your LinkedIn account. MarketStar employees should contact their direct supervisor if a link to activate was not emailed to them. Other listeners can start by going to linkedin.com/learning/activate. So get going, pick a few topics that you're interested in, set a weekly goal, and start creating growth with LinkedIn Learning. And now, enjoy the show. Well, here we go. How is it going, everyone? Welcome to the debut episode of the MarketStar Living the Six podcast, your monthly discussion where we share perspectives and stories on our purpose and values. Very happy to have you here. I am Steve Schwartzman. I am joined by our co-host, Nicole Fisher. We're finally doing this. It's been a while that we've been planning this out, so it's cool to finally have this thing up and running.
I know, it's finally real.
So as we said, this will be a monthly opportunity for us to get to know members of the organization and get an opportunity to deep dive our company purpose and values in a new, exciting, and casual way. Every month we'll have a guest to multiple guests and an opportunity to meet new people. And we are thrilled to introduce our first guest here on the debut episode. And we thought we might as well go big to kick this off. So we're heading all the way to Ireland. Please welcome our first guest on the podcast, Tony Byrne, now officially the Senior Vice President of Business Development and Marketing at MarketStar. If you haven't had a chance to get to know Tony, you're about to, and you're going to be very glad you did. We're so happy to have him with us. Tony, thank you so much for your time. Great to have you here.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for asking me, and good to see you and Nicole this morning.
We're very excited to fun to get a chance to do this. So obviously, it's always fun when we're trying to connect on different sides of the world, and then we threw the extra curveball at you with daylight savings. So it always makes it fun.
No, it's good. It's good. Thanks for the very kind introduction. I hope we haven't overhyped anything, but
much more hype to be had. I'm absolutely certain. I think we'll go ahead and jump this in. Of course, as we've talked about, the real focus of our discussions here on the show is really get a chance to get to know the purpose and values in different ways and get a better understanding for not only what those values are, what they constitute, how to use them, but why they even really and truly exist. And I know you played a role in the rollout of the purpose and values in some form or another. So I think really just to kick off, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience with the structure as it was, your reaction to whatever point you really first heard that this was going to take place, and I guess your overall perspective on where we stand as a company now that it's almost kind of a new order for us.
Yeah, some great questions there and great thoughts. So it's been interesting, Steve. I mean, this is the first time that I've been involved in an organization basically installing new values or updating their values and purpose. I have to say, most of my career has been in really the startup world. And the values and the purpose of a startup are sometimes set in with its founder, and they're easy. From my experience of working in smaller startups, it's been easier to kind of keep the values aligned because the founder is, in hands-on and works in the organization. But to be involved in a company of our size and its tenure, to really be considered about where it is and installing new values that are relevant to where the company came from, what it does, and where it wants to go in the future has been a very interesting project to be part of. And you're right, Steve. I was lucky enough to be with a group of some of our leaders back in December 19 when we were workshopping, done a bit of a listening tour and been very focused at sort of repivoting what we stand for and what we want to achieve together as an organization. And kind of coming out of that process, starting to, socialize some of the values. And, we did an offsite just before Christmas in 19, where we had an opportunity to experience some of the values, learn about them, understand them, shape them a little bit. So I definitely feel connected to the process of us coming together on these values and indeed our purpose. So it's been interesting to see, them being rolled out, even going through a couple of stages of rollout, right? So, I mean, people hear what the language is, what the verbs are, and they kind of associate their meaning to that. But now that we're actually live with them a couple of months, it's been interesting to see how they're starting to take wings, be applied by our folks in what they do, and collectively what we try and achieve together daily based on these values, driving what our purpose is. It's definitely been a cool thing to be part of.
It's interesting because in the interactions I've had with some members of our executive team, the phrase that I've heard from a handful of them is, when you see our current value structure, if you look at the literature behind it, the paragraphs and the descriptors for what's laid out, the term that I've heard come up a lot is they talked about every single word in those writings has been agonized over. It's something that they never at any point, they try to really put intentionally, we want to make sure that every single, iota, jot and tittle of this really spoke exactly how we need it to for this to work. And it sort of bleeds into my other thought. And again, this is an open discussion. So, I'd love Nicole's perspective on this as well, is the effort and the time and the intentionality that went into building these things out. This happens in a lot of companies. And I think the idea is, I think we've all been a part of different companies and organizations that have some foundational structure, whether it's a mission statement, a value system, some sort of pillar system, something that speaks to them. And it's very palpable to tell what companies and organizations are truly founded in those feelings and beliefs and in those structures, or if they're more necessarily almost, I'd call it lip service in a way, right? It's something you see on a slide on your first day of training, and you can't really put your finger on where they come up ever again. And there's a lot of companies that you can tell it's kind of a living, breathing nucleus. My question on that is, with that in mind, why is it so important from either of your perspectives on why we need a value system to function as a company, to reach our goals? Why is it important to you guys that that's something that stands in place and is constantly looked to and revisited and mastered?
Ooh, I would love to give my perspective on that one. So you're right, Steve. These values have been worked and reworked and agonized over and to hell and back, right? But I think that's what needed to happen. Throughout this whole process, we really wanted to make sure that those values were truly what the essence of what was already there in MarketStar. I think, I've been through a few companies and had some experience in the past of value structures and top things that come to mind when you work at a company, and those are already very well established. This is the first time that a company that I work for, it goes through this sort of like transformation, this metamorphosis from an established value structure to something completely new. And I thought it was just so amazing to watch that the values were so well thought out, and wanted to make sure that the values were truly representative of what goes on at MarketStar. I feel like for the first time, a company really wants to show what it's all about and really walk the walk and talk the talk, right? How that's important is that it's so crucial that it aligns with the true spirit of what a company is and does, and what the people feel and what they do, and how they talk about the company working for that company, right? And so it's so very crucial. It's right down to the very everyday workings. The values are just so integral and so easy to correlate to everyday tasks that you perform in the company. So it really feels like you do the values every single day. And that makes it even easier, thanks to all the work that, everybody in the executive team and others have done to really formulate these values, where they made it very unique, but also very, very easy to correlate to our everyday lives. It's amazing, really.
Great point, Nicole. And I can actually transport, back in my head to seeing and thinking about each individual value. And, what I would say is that I could see, how the best of us, even at that point, were kind of living these values. So it's not like there were things that had to be shaped and molded to any great kind of degree. I think all of us in pursuing the best in what we do each day would be living out some of these values, maybe articulating them a little bit differently, I would say. But Steve, you also mentioned, like, for a company, what is the purpose of having a value system? And is it lip service? I think an awful lot in practice it does end up as lip service. I have to say, this morning I did go through a drive-through Starbucks, and I'm not sure if the lady who gave me my latte really meant when she said, "Hey, have a nice day." I don't know if she meant it, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think when you think about what it could mean, instilling a new value system, for me, I think it's an opportunity for us all to leverage this, collective shared wisdom between this organization, so we have a frame of reference of how to make decisions, a frame of reference of how to act out in front of our customers, what we do from a quality standpoint. And I think this system of values, and these particular values, for me, give us a prism to look through our day-to-day, what we do at MarketStar, and align a collective pursuit in terms of what the right outcome is in every situation.
Yeah, I like that perspective with Prism. I feel like, from my experience, when I was young in my career, and I make it sound like I'm well and seasoned now, but I experienced this with different organizations going through it, and I never really caught the understanding of why this really is that important. And maybe it's because of how those organizations enacted their mission statements and whatnot. And I think something that speaks a lot to me now is one of the most valuable actions you can have as an organization or as an employee in being successful is course correction, is having the ability to consistently evaluate and consistently improve based on some level, and make sure that that the train is moving efficiently as much as it can. And a strong, actionable value system allows you to constantly have something that you can always look back to and make sure, is the path correct? Is the equipment up to speed? Are we doing what we need to? Are we in line with the direction that we need to be headed? Can we speak to that as well as we can? And I think that's something that has always been important to me. And then also it can be a mirror of the time. I think of, one of the more famous examples of this would be, when Facebook initially kicked off, their initial mission statement was to move fast and break things. And it was one of those new tech hip type of phrases that did speak a lot to what they were trying to accomplish at the time. And over the years, that's adjusted. They've moved on from that mentality because, one, I think when you become a public company, sometimes it's harder to adjust based off those measures. But I think the other side of it is we're in a different world now. We have a different general focus, and we can't look back on that mission statement and feel like we're on the direct path we need to grow as an organization. And so they switched those things up. And I think this change made sense because there was definitely new air being breathed into the company. And it made sense in a lot of ways. And while much of it is up to interpretation, it gives us an actionable view of that.
Yeah. And the other thing that I felt as well is that they are directive but not prescriptive, each one of these values. And I think that's a very important piece of how to make a culture be stronger than what it is by designing and implementing a new set of values and a purpose. So, I mean, it's interesting as I meet people in our organization or speak to people in our organization, both continents of the world that we operate in. It's interesting to hear the subtle differences around how people put some of these values into action in what they do. Now, they're absolutely aligned, as I said, but it's interesting how they make their own personal value within our values. And I think they're written in a way that they can be digested and implemented on the individual basis. So it's not a rule book. I mean, that's the important thing to say, that from my findings of the way I see people acclimating and using these values, certainly in Dublin, it's not a direction, if A, do B, but it is certainly a way that at a very top level, we can be aligned in what we do and still make what you do, whatever role it is within our organization, certainly personal to you. I thought that was a cool piece of the way they all hang together.
I wanted to comment on your phrase of moving fast and breaking things. That and the values that are a breath of fresh air. It kind of makes me think of a quote, and it makes me feel like really excited to say it all the time. And so I'm going to say it again. It feels like we're a 30-year-old startup where we've gone through this transformation. We're going through all these exciting changes. We have so many like great, truly spoken values, and it feels like we're a new company. It's kind of amazing.
I mean, that's a great point. I think it's so spot on. It's interesting. So I've been kind of working with MarketStar as a partner before, MarketStar acquired the P2M organization and we became, MarketStar Europe. So I think my first meeting with MarketStar was probably 5, maybe a little bit longer. And it's very interesting. When I met the EC as it was then, and some of the senior leaders, you could sense, even as an outsider, that change was coming. And it was an interesting time for the organization. So look, a new ownership has changed the culture. A new CEO has absolutely changed the culture within the organization. But I think really the launch of both those events, new ownership and a new CEO, is really been sort of capstoned by the launch of these values. We have the energy and the ambition, I feel, of a startup right now. And a startup has just got no holds barred, can take over the world. That's its purpose. And I think with this company, it's a very, very interesting alignment of a couple of things that make a company great. One, we've got a brand, we've got some heritage, we've got an amazing team that's been built up over years, but we've got a new CEO with a new perspective, or a relatively new CEO. We've got a new owner who's extremely vested and backed behind the organization. And those set of circumstances, I have to say, as somebody who studies business and been in business and loves business, and that nucleus of special ingredients doesn't happen a lot. It doesn't happen anywhere. In fact, right now, I couldn't tell you of another company where I see the stars aligned in exactly that way.
I love that perspective. I think it's that comment on being a 30-year startup, I've always thought of just like it's the same emperor with new clothes. It's it's a chance to really take a vision that was carried over 30 years ago, a vision that I think still stands and still has so much merit, but to put it in the emphasis of it's very much a different planet now. And we're aligning ourselves with that, but finding out how to do it your own way. And in this era of tech and just fast moving parts, it is very difficult to find out how to do things your own way on an organizational front. So it's always fun. Feel like you're really on that ship. Let's take a different direction from this point. We had a really good chance to talk about methodology, I think, of the purpose and values. And I'd love to get a chance to dive a little bit more into the application of this structure, especially in your unique perspective, because obviously, the nucleus of our company is here in Utah. It can often be difficult to make sure that organizations outside of the area are connected, and especially with our Dublin team. But I have to give you a perspective, and I think this is a huge compliment, because I've heard this more than once from different locations as I've heard discussions and sat in meetings discussing the values and implementing them and getting employees on board. I've heard from multiple places, well, I've heard the Dublin team does this, or I've heard the European, the team in Europe, they focus on this thing. So you should know, I think you're getting a very strong grade for building that environment. I'd be curious in your experience, taking this from the process and the experience of getting to see how this was built, and then trying to actually create this environment with your own team, get them to adopt it, get them to believe in it, and see what the merits and the fruits of it were. What was that experience like? What tactics were you able to do? Where, what's the story of getting, finding a way to level up this team with a new direction in place?
It's a great question. So look, I mean, culturally in Dublin, we're I would say we're quite Americanized. We're the furthest country to the west in Europe, and we speak English, and we're probably the closest thing to this, the time zone, even though it's still a bit of a gap. But there are certain cultural differences. And I would describe many Europeans, and certainly the Irish, as, hey, we won't believe on something until we see it's worth believing in, right? If I could describe sort of the culture like that. So sometimes, the subtle difference that I would see, and probably did feel as we went through that process of rolling out the values, it's like, I don't want to be saying these and acting out like I'm living them until I see that they work and how they work for me or my customers or my team. And what I noticed is maybe a subtle difference where people out here started telling stories of how they were applied, as opposed to just reminding each other on our teams out here what the values were. And I think that's where I saw a kind of a gradual ascent of the values starting to take flight and being embedded into the psyche of the team out here. Now, I'd be interested to see if that was similar in North America, but I would say that where I could start to notice our teams kind of celebrating, here is an example of how I applied one particular value in a situation, whether it was a one-on-one or maybe something with a client. And it's almost the share of that story was the evidence for me that the embedding was happening of the values. And I thought that was a little bit distinctly different, seeing it happen that way, than just our guys just kind of verbatim reciting the values, if that makes sense.
What do you think was the easiest value that people took to right away? Translating from like Dublin, there's, the more locations, the more a company grows, the more you could see a kind of siloed value structure, and things just kind of organically happen. But when the new values were rolled out, what do you think was the easiest one that the team in Dublin took to right away?
It's interesting. I think everybody, or most people, would regard themselves as a hard worker and committed. So I think the one that was easiest to kind of acclimate to and understand and have a good sense that you're living in is probably all in every day. I think most of we're lucky, and it's probably by virtue of the industry that we're in. We have sales teams, we're a sales organization. So sales culture can sometimes be described as hardworking and persevering and striving for success and striving against goals and targets. So I do think probably my personal opinion would be the one that was easiest for our teams to understand and get and feel like that they're aligned to it was all in every day. And then I think the individuals that we have on our teams that are more growth minded and feel like, they're on a constant learning kind of track, started talking about, I suppose, the master of your craft and how that pursuit of becoming a master is a never-ending type of an endeavor. I would say, Nicole, to answer your question, I would say those two values were the ones that I felt were kind of talked about, understood, and felt most aligned to almost out of the box.
That's awesome. That's so cool to hear, especially masters of our craft. I don't think that kind of value is duplicated anywhere else, at least in my experience. I think MarketStar does an incredible job of really putting forward the best effort to try and level up their teams professionally and personally. I really, truly believe that. And seeing, things come out of the woodwork that we're doing and providing like real career growth paths, and just like hearing people from across the organization and hearing their stories of like, where did you start at MarketStar? How did you get here? There's always an interesting story of how that happens. This is where growth happens. And so where people can have lasting careers. And I think that's amazing.
I love the mindset with masters of your craft, because I would say some of the most successful individuals and successful leaders that I've worked with in my career, one very common thread between them is they're very vivacious learners. They're very curious people. When they see a new obstacle, they want to figure out not only how to overcome an obstacle, but overcome it in the best way. They love talking about those opportunities. They love diving into those opportunities. They have a very healthy obsession in seeking those things out. And it speaks so much more to why masters of your craft. I think that wording in itself speaks so much, because this easily could have just been do your job well. And I think it goes beyond that. It's so much more of a mental and emotional improvement than just simply figure out what the tasks are and perform them.
I love that there's that personal element too. It's a dual meaning. I love how so many, if not all, of our values can be construed in widely different ways. They're so versatile, but yet so easy to understand and apply to professional and personal lives. And in some ways, like if a value applies mostly in a personal manner to you, sometimes that can also translate to doing well professionally. As if you can connect that that value to a passion that you have, that also can do wonders when it just becomes easier when applying that and finding more examples of how you can, feel that value professionally as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Attention all Utah artists! The MarketStar Foundation is looking to commission a public art project on the parking structure behind MarketStar headquarters on 25th Street and Washington in Ogden. The goal of this project will be to highlight one of MarketStar's core values: you belong. Your art will be visible from the Ogden City Amphitheater, home of the Ogden Twilight Concert Series and Christmas Village. The foundation is asking for artists to submit a project concept and complete budget for their design by Wednesday, March 31st. Selected artists will have a 24 by 35 foot space to express their creativity and incorporate a public paint portion, allowing volunteers and community members to contribute. Head to ogdendowntown.com/call-for-art for more information. The MarketStar Foundation will then be in touch with you following your submission. We can't wait to see your art come to life.
So I have a question for you guys.
Please.
When the values were launched, which particular value resonated with you most? And I'm curious now, a few months later after launch, is it still the main value that resonates with you, or is there another?
That is such a good question. I'm going to cheat and allow Nicole to go first.
I would say you belong. You belong is such a great value. And it seems to be in my experience, it seems like the most popular one when you seem to gauge the reaction from the wider MarketStar audience. But it connects to me personally as well. I see how that benefits and how that reflects in so many other people. And that brings me joy when I see people, responding to our surveys, or when I see people openly discussing how comfortable they feel at a job, that, it just, I don't know, it gives me the warm fuzzies, I guess.
It's so interesting because of all the values, I actually think that particular value might be the value that most makes us unique. So there's that one point that I really think it kind of stopped me in my tracks, where I was thinking that's almost like non-business. But then you think about it deeper and reflect on it more, and you go, yes, it's such an enhancer. I just think it's so smart and so important on so many levels. I thought about it. Hey, we tend to put them in order where you belong is the last one in the way it's illustrated, and made sense to me because I read it as, look, if you live by all these other values, then you truly do belong at MarketStar. And I thought putting it at the end and just power of what that is was really just the capstone on what all the other values were.
I really like that. And I would say what's interesting for me is you belong in a way is probably the one that I had the biggest obstacle in understanding. And that isn't a criticism on it. It's simply, for me, it was finding the tangible maneuver. What am I doing to actually feel like I'm embracing this effectively and efficiently, and making it more than just, I guess dialing it down to one thing, trying to avoid that idea of it's beyond just diversity and it's beyond just being welcoming. And those are extremely important things. But how am I really understanding this value holistically and acting upon it? And I would say that journey and that obstacle is what's really helped me in becoming such a strong believer in this value system, because as I've tried my best to consistently have it in my mind, and as I've evaluated our team and our functions and are we holding to this, I think it's really breathed new and a more effective life into what we do. And to answer your question on the value that spoke to me the most, for me, it actually was creativity that impacts. And I think a lot of that is because my roles in the years that I've been in the company, when I stepped into any role, it's been in some form or field or focus that I've actually never done before, or that I never had prior formal experience in, sense of it wasn't direct to my major in college, or it wasn't the type of job that I've done in the past. And for me, I feel like creativity that impacts, problem solving has very much been the lifeblood of what I've done and tried to be successful with, because I've had to find unique ways to fulfill tasks. And so many people may look at what I do now in my role and may think that it might be a little non sequitur to what they would imagine a very typical person in my role to do. I try to find that balance of obviously understanding how the industry goes about these things, but also embracing my own take on it. And that's actually a discussion that I had with one of our executives when they were sitting as my direct supervisor for a while in my current role. I had that discussion with them exactly on that note in saying, I really want to get a better understanding of how the industry and the other people in the world who do what I do and get a better feel for how they go about their day so that I'm more in line kind of with the industry standard. And their basic response was, that's smart, but proceed with caution, because what makes you good at what you do is how you view it, how you go about it, and how you figured it out. And we like having Steve's flavor on what your output is. While it's good to have those, continue to embrace that creativity. And so that's really what in a sense spoke to me and was something that I felt like I could take and run with. It's ironic in that value and my response to it was sort of me experiencing a you belong type experience, even though I would say that was difficult for me, because it very much kind of, when I heard that and when I focused on that, it very much felt like they were speaking to me. And that was a cool moment.
That's very interesting. So just as you talk about just creativity that impacts, when I first heard that, and this is just an example, right, of how the values align us all, but we can all make our own personal meaning around it. Where I took direction from that particular value was really to try and install a mindset of being creatively focused around solving problems. And often the solution to a problem is just the way you're looking at the problem. And, when you feel something isn't right or something isn't working, to be driven to try and change the perspective. And by using that value of, here's a problem, I'm going to apply this value to it. And what way is there to inject some creativity into this particular challenge? And often the solution is just from perspective or looking at something a little bit differently. And that's personally how I sort of acclimate and actually try and put that particular value to work most days. I wouldn't say I have a big problem every day, but when they come up, instead of saying this is a problem, it becomes now, for me personally, the challenge of how can I change my look at this problem to find out the solution and purposely be creative in the change of that perspective.
I love that. That's fantastic. But I did want to take a chance to speak to a very paramount part of your experience. And I know you've already touched on it, but the journey that led to our Dublin team, which we were very excited about at the time, through partnering with the agency that you had a chance to help found and build to the prominence that it is now. I'd love to hear your experience on the general startup experience. When what it takes. There's many people, I think, within the company and outside the company who may be hearing this, who have ambitions of that type of experience and to see success in that. I'd love to hear a little bit about the story of how that kicked off, what principles, were important to you in getting that together and led to now. But then on top of that, as you look back on it and you think of this value structure, what are those strings that connect the principles that brought you to now and the values that are impacting us today?
It's very interesting. So, the whole startup culture and the boom in tech over the last 10 years or so has created this very romantic view of what it's like to start a company, be a startup. I have to say, often it's not actually that romantic. I actually found being a startup founder and operator to be very frustrating because you can only grow at a certain rate. There's always things that you want to do without adequate team size or resources. And I actually found it more frustrating sometimes than rewarding. Now, it was a very rewarding experience, and I'm so grateful that I was lucky enough to have had the good fortune to build a great team, which then led to becoming what the team is, the MarketStar, EMEA team in Dublin. And as I look back, Steve, a lot of the values, even though I would have maybe acclimated them a little bit differently or described them a little bit differently, but a lot of the values that we have probably were put in place as we started and grew and then partnered and then became MarketStar EMEA at different stages, maybe not as elegantly put. And what's interesting for me is, as I reflect then on the values, I can certainly apply or see how versions of these values or alignment with these values has created the success for our Dublin team as we grew from those stages. And I think it's hard to be a startup and go through some of those gradual chapter changes. So like when you're 5 people, it's a chapter. When you're 25 people, it's a chapter. When you get to 100 people, the tone is different. And it's very difficult, I think, past 100 people to be so hands-on that the natural culture can be in line with what you hope it would be. So for me, I think the watermark is probably about 100, maybe 150 people. If you don't have something that's directive, that's shareable, that everyone can align and understand with in terms of a purpose or a mission or values, I think that is probably one of the reasons startups either fail or never scale. So it's interesting, as you say, like, what do you think of these values, and in that context of being that startup guy? I think the pieces that brought us luck and growth are very in line with each one of our values. And I can think back in my head how each one of these values, I could give you an instance of how something similar would have happened or would have unfolded. And even when we started, I remember giving a pep talk to our small team 5 or 6 years ago, Steve, when we first started working with MarketStar. And, the pep talk went something like, this is a great break for our team. It could lead to amazing things, which it has. We just got to nail it. So like everyone's got to be all in and just full pedal to the metal. I think about masters of your craft, and I think about all in every day, like that sort of mindset, even though we would have articulated a little bit differently, was really what led the start of a great partnership, which then became part of an acquisition and the growth of a global company together.
It takes me back to I'd say probably my smaller version of this, and my parallel to this is when I first came to MarketStar, I was a part of a team that was newly launched. I was a part of one of our pilot groups, and very much what you said really spoke to me in the moment of there is a lot of frustration and there is a lot of, the analogy of throwing spaghetti at the wall. And I remember, the small sales team that I was on when we were doing this launch, we'd huddle one day and our manager would say, okay, we're going to try this thing and we may end up changing it in about a week, but let's try it for a week and then we'll come back. And the very next day we'll come back together and said, never mind, not a week. We're going to change it right now. It's clearly not working. And then the next day we'd go, okay, this new thing might be working. Let's keep trying that. And then half a day will go by and someone will say, never mind, it's failing now. We got to keep going. And it was that place of like, you felt like you kept getting to squares 2 and 3 and straight back to square one. But it continued to build that foundation. And my experience of that was very often when we're looking at the details of what makes these launch experiences successful, very commonly people focus on the tasks. And I feel like often the successful experiences come from those who focus on the people and are allowing them, leaders who amplify really comes to mind, allowing them to help build the lifeblood of what that is to become. And that's always, I think that's spoken really heavily to me. I would be curious. Obviously, you said, it's been several years in partnering with MarketStar, but obviously the details and nuts and bolts of the merger isn't something we would dive into. But in that idea of you belong and having that idea in mind, knowing that you have something that you founded that, you're partnering with another company, it's kind of moving under their umbrella. On top of that, they're headquartered in a different part of the world. What did you notice in that transition from startup to merger that helped you see and feel and confirm that you belong mentality, that does exist, and that, you feel good and see the value in this change?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve. So I would say that we had the benefit of having a very healthy partnership for a number of years before acquisition. So actually, it's funny, when the acquisition took place, we changed the name, but like our day-to-day and the culture of our teams was already acclimated and aligned. So I have to say, I didn't notice a huge step jump in that acquisition, but I think that the embedding of the two companies' cultures really happened over a couple of years in a nice, organic way. And how would I have described us working together and how that cultural alignment happened? I think that, the people at MarketStar really are the difference of what MarketStar is, in my humble opinion. And I think, I could see a lot of the values of what we stand for today in action, or versions of them in action, with how the folks in Utah embraced and partnered with our people in Dublin, allowing us the chance to ramp up and operate at a different scale. And then when we got into that interesting point where we had leadership lines from the Utah leadership to teams in Dublin, I mean, all that happened so gracefully and naturally. I would say that, we were always teams out here, because I don't even want to talk about our team and it's all kind of one team from my perspective now, but we were always made feel like we were connected, aligned, and that we belonged in the room, in the meetings, and, on the accounts with our clients. So I have to say, and others have asked me, Steve, like, what was the difference? Like, did you wake up the next day post-acquisition and how was life different? Really, it wasn't, because what had blossomed over years was really an alignment and a shared purpose. But I do feel that the teams here and the teams in Utah were somewhat following the same North Star. So the alignment was easy. And I also, back to this conversation, I feel that's why it's made for kind of a natural rollout and distribution of our values.
I was going to say, like, I can relate to that too. I mean, hearing about your time, even when you were manning a startup, like I can definitely commiserate, even with some of my experience just here at MarketStar. I was on a productization team a while back, and it felt like, you just go every day, and everything's changing all at the same time, and sometimes twice in the same day. And so, you kind of see how you were able to get through that portion, that time, and the people that you were with to help you through it. And you can kind of retrospectively look back and say, like, hey, I guess some values were at work, even back then. So it's really awesome to kind of make that realization and have that sort of reflection.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like, some of those things make sense and align in the rear view, and not much at the time. When you don't have things as well considered and documented and put together like our values, you know what I mean? You can see the right things happening sometimes when you think back to something that was good, but even though you wouldn't have been necessarily able to articulate it or share it as eloquently as I think we can when we think about our values and what we do, what we strive to do day in, day out.
So we're right at the end of our rope here. I've got just one last question that I wanted to run to you, of course, and it's kind of how I think we'll close a lot of these. Is one big element to the purpose and values that was always intriguing to me. It has a mystique behind it, but it's the adage of living the sixth and pursuing the seventh,
yes,
and what that means to people. And I want to take an opportunity really quick to make that personal to you, and whether this is a current motto that you have or you've had throughout your career, or something that's consistently driven you, or it's a specific type of motivation. What to you, for Tony Byrne, is the seventh value?
The pursuit of success. So one thing that's important to me is that I feel like I'm moving toward growth or enrichment, getting better. I mean, you can think about our values and how all of them really touch on this particular point. But for me, the feeling of making progress towards that goal, in my mind, is success. The way I'm sort of dealing with that one piece around pursuing the seventh is really, I think that success and that seventh value is unlocked by living the sixth. That's how I make it all work for me.
I love that. I think that really is everything that we have here. Nicole, I'll kick it to you. Do you have anything that you wanted to make sure we hit? Or
I think this has been great, too. I think people just fall in love with your story, Tony, and want to know more about you. So we're so happy that we got to chat with you.
My pleasure, guys. It was great fun. I'm most honored that you invited me to be the first guest. Hopefully, it was good to listen to from the audience side, and we get everyone coming back for the second episode, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We wouldn't have had it any other way. It's been wonderful having you as our first guest, and I hazard to say that I don't think it'll be the last time. We'll hope to have you back again and very soon. But thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you.
You guys, thanks so much. Talk soon.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of MarketStar's Living the Six podcast. We'll be back next month with new guests and topics to continue sharing stories and perspectives on MarketStar's purpose and values. Be sure to download and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us to let us know what you've enjoyed about the show and any thoughts on what we can do to make the listener experience even better. MarketStar employees can connect with the show on Facebook Workplace, and all listeners can contact us by emailing talentdevelopment@marketstar.com and including podcast in the subject line. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.